The Russians put the first man on the moon.
We were so close.
Thought it was about being first, but the stakes are much bigger than that.
The world's changing.
This is the new front in the Cold War. The Soviets are going to build a lunar military outpost. The president wants one too, and he wants it first. We cannot allow space to become another battlefield.
Why would you want weapons on the moon?
We're at war here.
You are our eyes and ears up there. I didn't sign up for this.
The Soviets are a threat to this base. We need to send them a message. This is our territory.
Is this really happening? My God.
Hey guys, welcome to yet another review on Balloonhead Productions. I'm your host as usual. My name is Marcelo Nostroza. I'd like to welcome you to my review of season 1 of For All Mankind, episode 1, entitled Red Moon. All right, guys. So if you've been on my channel for a while now, you know that every time, without fail, every time that I talk about something having to do with space, there's one guy that I always call in, and there's one guy that knows more stuff about actual space history than I do, and I couldn't think of anybody else to come with me on this journey of discussing every episode of For All Mankind that there is so far than this wonderful gentleman. He's been on my channel several times before. Without any further ado, I would like to welcome back to the channel Dan Decker. Hey Dan.
Hello. It is so great to be back, Marcelo. Thank you so much for having me on yet again. I am so excited to share our enthusiasm for this show. How great was that trailer that led us off?
Yeah. It was absolutely great. Do you want to give the audience who is watching this right now a summary of what For All Mankind is, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you're unfamiliar, For All Mankind is an alternate history science fiction drama that explores what could have happened if the space race had never ended. We begin in the 1960s after the Soviets were the first to land on the moon, beating the United States in July 1969. These events cause the United States to intensify efforts and reclaim the lead from the Soviets. The series starts off following the lives of NASA astronauts, engineers, their families as they navigate the challenges and triumphs of this alternate history timeline. For All Mankind explores themes of ambition, sacrifice, patriotism, and the impact of technological advancement on society. That sums up a lot. But we're going to get into this one episode at a time so that ourselves and our listeners and viewers have a chance to digest all this.
Why don't we just get into it right off the bat? I found it really interesting and ominous that Ronald D. Moore, that's one of the creators of the series, and for those of you who know me, I love Ronald D. Moore. He's one of my favorite writers of all time. He is one of the best Star Trek writers ever, one of the best science fiction writers, and stop period for me. And for him to be one of the creators of the show is just amazing to me. Anyway, he actually wrote this first episode, Red Moon, and this episode starts off with the famous JFK speech that he makes about how important it is for Americans to go to the moon, and that we don't go to the moon lightly. We go to the moon because it's hard. We go to the moon because it's not easy. And it starts out with that speech. But the brilliant thing that I think the show does is underneath that speech, they have this ominous music that's something like something isn't right. It's very much in the ode to The Man in the High Castle from Amazon.
Right.
So what are your thoughts basically on the first images of this first episode of For All Mankind? What did you think about the opening of the show?
So what I caught myself doing with this is listening to the actual history of the audio of what JFK was saying, and trying to find the contrast in are these images that are in historical context, or are these some of the tricks that the creators are playing on us to subtly alter the history? You know, Ronald D. Moore is, as you alluded to, he's a fantastic storyteller, and what he did with Battlestar, we could have a whole show on that. But the like you said, the ominous, it's what would liken to an uncanny valley, right? This is familiar, but something is unfamiliar about it, and it's a perfect setup because it gives you, it gives you something that you can begin grounded with, and then okay, but now where are we going?
And then I find it really, really interesting that that Ron pivots to a young woman in Mexico looking at the moon.
Hmm.
And I found it. I'm not saying that I didn't like it, but I found it very strange that he would start here. And I
Right.
have to be honest with you guys. First off, I need to say this: if you're watching this show, if you're watching us discuss For All Mankind, and you haven't watched the show, there will be slight spoilers here and there to where these characters are going to end up. I didn't like Aleda for the first couple seasons.
Hmm.
I really warmed up to her when she became mission control commander, when
Hmm.
the older version of her.
Right.
But I will say the way that Ron introduces all of the main cast that we're going to be dealing with, not only in this episode but throughout the whole season, is wonderful. Because first we meet Aleda and we understand that she is from a lower income family, and we also understand that her mother is sick, and Aleda seems to have some sort of fascination with the moon. Although in the opening scene, she comes off as a young kid who doesn't understand the weight of the situation. But I love the moment when her father calls her inside and she sits by her mother, and her mother, who's obviously sick, says, "I don't want to go to bed. I want to experience this moment with her."
Right.
And her mother says to pay attention. What's happening here is very, very important. The other thing that I liked is the guy on the TV who is doing the American broadcast of the Russians going to the moon. He actually seems like a guy who would be a news anchor in the 60s. I don't listen. I don't know if that guy was real, or like you said, it's something that the production did, the trickery. But the way that the guy speaks and the things that he says seem so real. So what did you think about that stuff?
So those are all really good call outs because kind of the same, we don't know how important Alita will become when she's introduced to us. And the context with which she's introduced is, it draws you in a sense of confusion. Why are we witnessing this from this young lady's perspective? But to touch on what you're saying about the news broadcast, the delivery of the information. We will be receiving live pictures from the moon. Is a very indicative of how news was delivered in that time period in the 60s. And although not named, I believe this newscaster is very much meant to remind folks of Walter Cronkite, and how he. So if you go back and watch the actual news broadcast from 1969, the Walter Cronkite broadcast, you'll recognize it in this, which is just another note, even though it wasn't named exactly. And the clever thing about it is, even going in, perhaps knowing this is alternate history. If you didn't, you wouldn't until the reveal. The way the newscast is delivered is very ambiguous and very similar to what we're familiar with from actual history. And so if you went into the show cold, not knowing that it's different, just thinking it's about space, this is going to set up the twist like pretty good. And it's like you said, with the mother, we understand that she's sick, that she's conveying to her daughter through dialogue, but this is natural dialogue. This is what parents would say to their children. But a lot of show don't tell going on, which is just that's top-notch storytelling.
Mhm. The next thing we see a quick shot of a bunch of people in a bar watching the same broadcast that we see, and then we cut to Margot driving to Mission Control, and I love the quick succession your thoughts of watching Margot drive into Mission Control, her get out of the car and go into the NASA control room for the first time. It's really really cool when we and then we come across Warner Von Braun, and then we see everything there. And the thing that I am constantly impressed by is a production design and how this production was so faithful to everything that was so faithful to the way that NASA looked at the time, because one of the production assistants, if I'm not mistaken, or the or not the production assistant, but one of the designers is a Star Trek alum, Michael Lakuta.
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
I am like every time I see the show, I can't believe how much detail they put into the sets, specifically NASA and the way that it looked at the time. But I really, really like that scene because it introduces Margot in a great way, and it really kicks off the relationship between her and Warner Brambon in a real interesting way. So what do you think about her introduction? Just not knowing anything about her at first, because like we said, we meet her in a quick moment of her walking to NASA, and to us, she could just be an underling, but she turns out to be something way much more than that.
Well, Margot goes to some interesting places, and there is a line near the end of this episode when we get there. I want to point out what we learn very quickly again in the show don't tell is that she's a fast paced, she's a mover, a doer. She's while this point in history, she is limited due to sexism and misogyny. Those are the only limits on her. And we see some of that a little later, but I did a little digging, as you know, I like to do when we talk about these things, for little tidbits of trivia. And as she's coming in the little speed run she's doing through the hallway, and she acknowledges another woman coming through the hall, I believe she calls her Poppy. She's like, "Hello, Poppy." If that reference is legitimate, that would be a reference to the actual first woman who broke some boundaries in engineering at NASA. So again, paying attention to the detail, drawing us into a reality, but hooking on, like they say, the best lies have a hint of truth. And we see quickly, that she has a just a familiar relationship with Werner von Braun, because and they just do that through glances, again, show not tell. And later they have a conversation that clues us into a little more, but it's very, very well done. And we get a good sense of what kind of character Margot is.
The next thing that we see, just in really quick succession, is a guy coming home to his house, and on his front lawn is a little toy of I think a jet, or yeah, it's a jet. It's Gordo Stevens coming home to see the moon landing with Tracy and his kids. Any quick words on that?
we that all happens very quickly, and I think that it is meant more to we don't even, I don't think, other than Gordo's coming home from the bar after the landing, so he's coming home from the outpost, I believe.
Oh,
And we don't know their dynamic quite yet, but we get a sense for that. Astronauts live on, they live on adrenaline. They're constantly on the move. And we don't even get a real sense for the the tenseness that's in this relationship, as we learn a little bit later. This is kind of a quick introduction as far as Gordo goes. We don't get a sense for him until a little bit later.
hmm I want to take us to the outpost because you mentioned it already. So the moment is here. The astronaut is landing on the moon. The guy who is supposed to be like Walter Cronkite is doing a great job of building tension. And I love the way that the director focuses in on one of our main characters, um basically our Neil Armstrong of this series, Ed. And they do a slight push in, and I love the moment when the astronaut takes his helmet off, and the music that plays is it's so ominous, and it's so scary, but you could tell by everybody's face in the bar that they're disgusted, but nobody says anything, but you could just see in their faces that they are fucking pissed. And I'm talking about everybody in the outpost. I'm not talking about the
Right.
other individuals that we have seen in rapid succession here, like Dan has said. And eventually the astronaut starts talking in Russian. And because of the time, we don't have we don't have TiVo where we could change the language. And I love how the newscaster who's relaying who's relaying what's happening on the moon says, we'll get a quick translation of what the cosmonaut said for you in just a second. Do you have any words about the great speech that Ron D. Moore had the Russians say from the moon?
I found that to be a really excellent because the crowd, as you mentioned, the frustration that we see on the group's face, Ed's face especially, and we're still as viewers kind of recovering from the change in this history that resulted, and as you pointed out, we're waiting on the translation. We'll know soon what they said. Kind of reframes what the entire rest, for the vast majority of the rest of the world, had to do when we landed on the moon, right? The words that Neil said had to be translated for almost everyone else. And so kind of that anticipation of what did he just say to the rest of the universe about us landing on the moon. But to answer your question specifically, the nature of the speech, I thought that it represented rather clearly what you could expect their speech to have been. It was very much about the collective win for the Soviet Union, famously operating under collectivism. But it highlighted the collective achievement over, the singular and individual. And they had a lot more to say because while looking back, Neil's words didn't address any direct like American propaganda. This speech definitely had some what would be considered propaganda regards communism. So I thought it was again, Ron knows his stuff. He's been writing these kinds of stories couched in soft science fiction like Deep Space Nine for decades. And he was very subversive about the way that he did it, but he's a craftsman at this by now.
Yeah, look, a few people know that I love the show. I absolutely I adore the show, and people know that I'm obsessed with space. But the one thing that people ask me, would you be interested in writing an episode of For All Mankind, and do you think that you could do it? And as much as I love the show, I don't think I could do it. You know why? Because I don't. I love the history of NASA, but I'm not steeped in real NASA history, so I don't think that that will be the right place for me. Like I could definitely come up with a story for for the characters to do, but I would need a research guide to say, okay, I want this to happen. How would I do that?
Exactly.
Or what would I need to make that happen? With somebody like Ron and his other co-creators, they actually love the space program. So they don't need to ask a bunch of people what happened because they know the history of the people who were actually there and what did. So all they have to do is twist the story for their own purposes, which is something really, really astounding. And um, I really, really enjoy, just very quickly before we move on, I really enjoy the way that these writers choose to tell the story of For All Mankind, because everything that they do seems to come back in a very, very satisfying way. If it's not in a very, very satisfying way, it's in a very, very annoying way, in a very, very sad way, which we'll get to
Yeah.
much later on as we make our way through the series here. But the next scene that we see is very, very quick. We're at the next morning, and Ed is at home with his wife Karen, and he's looking at a newspaper, and on the top of the newspaper it says Red Moon, and it shows a picture of the Russian on the moon. And very, very quickly, we meet Ed's son, Shane, and he's going to school. And I love the way that Ed, before Shane comes in, he goes, last day of school, and then kind of goes, no, that's next week. And the way that Ed talks to Shane is that very, very typical 60s, I'm the father. He shows love, but not the way that you or I would show love to our kids today.
Right.
He's very, very stern with Shane. And look, Shane is so cute, and I'm like, hug your son. I mean, hug the kid. Don't tell him. Don't say what. And he goes, Shane goes, I'm sorry, yes, sir. And I'm like, oh my God, these people in the '60s, kids, hug your children.
Yep, exactly.
You know.
And I was raised with a pretty good bit of that. What did you say? With the expectation that I was disrespectful by dropping the honorific, as it were.
Right.
But you're right. What we see, because he is interested enough to know that he needs something relatable to say to his son, so he catches up real quick. And that's the nature of his job. He's going to be distracted. He's keeping up with launch timelines, not when Shane gets out of school.
Right.
And again, foreshadow, spoiler alert. Knowing where Shane ends up, it's like you say, hug the kid.
Yeah.
And real quick, just something to touch on with these two, the interaction between Karen and Ed. And I think we noted this before we started recording, but the way how they all look so young. I was struck by how young all of the actors looked, to the point that I was like, did they intentionally de-age them for the earlier seasons so that as it would be less noticeable, because they just look like too young. But what I noticed about Karen and the choices that the actor was making, even her voice sounded younger, more innocent, a little bit higher pitched. Not the Karen that we come to know in the later seasons, the more stronger, confident person that we come to see. But yeah, hug your kids. That's good advice to anyone watching. If you've got kids, call them, tell them you love them, I'll give them a hug.
Yeah, that's a great point that you made. That in this season of For All Mankind, the actors just seem so younger, and you actually wondered if they actually de-aged them to look a little bit more the appropriate age that they would be if they were in these situations. For me personally, listen, I love the show, but one thing that I think the show hasn't got right yet is the old person makeup. And I do think that when the show started, is the actors without any makeup or prosthetics. And any makeup or prosthetics, heavy stuff. But as the years go on, as the decades go on in the show, as they put their actors through more and more makeup, I think that it's a little noticeable, but it does a job. But for me,
Ed's beard was
a little bit better.
distracting.
This
past season, Ed's beard was really distracting.
Very, very distracting. So as Shane goes away to school, Karen basically says, what do you think is going to happen with this first program? What's going to go down? And Ed is beside himself. He's got a plate of bacon and eggs right in front of him. He hasn't touched it. And as Ed walks out of the kitchen, Karen says, what do you want me to do with this newspaper? And Ed at first says, toss it. Ed walks off. A second later, he comes back and he says, no, keep it. So I really, really like that moment where we see, or we've seen how disappointed Ed is. But I like the fact that he has a second chance to speak up to Karen in reference to not throwing away the newspaper. And I like the fact that he keeps it
Yeah.
because that could serve as motivation for
Mhm.
Ed and the rest of the space program as we move forward here. The next thing that we see is something that I think is a staple of For All Mankind at this point. For All Mankind at this point. We see Margot waking up in the office,
Yes.
and I
know
go,
it.
wait a
Exactly.
minute, you sleep at NASA? How in the
Yep.
hell? Who gave you permissions for that? But I will say that scene of watching her get up and go through her morning routine
Mhm.
is such a staple of the show now that it would just seem wrong if it's not there anymore.
Right.
So so basically, what did you think of the first scene of watching Margot wake up and do her things?
I got the same reaction that you did. I was like, she has always slept at work. She's never kept a room at a home or anything like that we know of. If she keeps a home, we don't see it. But what I learned by watching this scene, because it starts off with her essentially popping out of bed and then she folds it up. And it's like folds into a bookcase almost. And as you said, she goes through her morning routine, which is incredibly well mapped out. Everything has a secondary purpose. Almost everything she uses is either tucked away in a in a nice compact manner or serves a secondary purpose. She flips over a picture and it's her mirror, right? As she's brushing her teeth or she's doing something else alongside studying orbital mechanics. If you didn't catch that, she's doing orbital mechanical corrections in her little notebook. And so what we learn is that, again, she's incredibly smart. She's very process driven. And she's incredibly organized, which is going to play into where her role goes in the future. But yeah, again, just here's a whole plate of show don't tell, right? We learned so much about Margot, and that is what, it's 40 seconds, maybe a minute. It doesn't feel long because she's a fast-paced person. And so we get a lot of information about this character, and again, looking incredibly young compared to her aged up self. But yeah, fantastic. She's one of my favorites, regardless. And we learned so much in so little time here for her.
Yeah, I think it was a really interesting core for the writers to put it in there, and like Dan said, we learn a lot about the way that Margot makes her way through the world. She's very, very organized. She's very, very efficient, and that, like Dan said, plays a lot into the way that her character works, and we will learn that as the show goes on. The next scene that we see Ed arriving in the astronaut room, and this scene is really, really wonderful because we get to see an actual astronaut give Ed and the rest of the people in the astronaut corps basically a nice stern talking to and saying that, hey, we fucked up
Mm-hmm.
and it shouldn't have happened, but we're not gonna work today because it's obvious that everybody's head is not where it needs to be. So I need you to go home and do whatever it is you do, but when you come back on Monday, we're going to do this again. And I really like that speech because it didn't show any hint of malice. He didn't scream, he didn't blame anybody. He just took what was given to him and gave them a nice turn to talk to and then sent them on their merry way. Not to say that these astronauts didn't understand the weight of the situation or weren't pissed off themselves, but I think Deke made the right decision of not piling on to the astronauts' anger and just sympathizing with it. But what do you think of the use of actual living astronauts in the series?
Those are another couple of points. Like where are some of the historical differences, and what are some of the things that they continue to touch on using Deke, especially his real life, what we know about his real life character, his biographical character, him as a person in our reality, and see that well played, because you and I, having done the shows that we've done and watched the movies that we've watched for that, are familiar with Deke Slayton as a character. So to see them, they got it they got it right, I think, and especially it serves well for what this is. And I enjoy that because they again, speaking of real world astronauts, they mention a few later, but we have Neil, Buzz, and Michael Collins there for Apollo 11 as intended. But to the point of how he handles the situation, he knows that this point in the week, with the big feelings that everyone has, that being angry and pressing them is going to get nowhere. It's going to just further frustrate them. It's going to keep them from wanting to find solutions to the problems they're about to face. And it is the right thing to do. And if you're about to mention what happens next, I apologize, but when they light out the building, I believe Ed says last one buys the rounds or whatever, and they they're all cool and they're shaggy walking until they kind of all glance at each other and take off. And that says so much about the astronaut corps characters. They go out, they get into their fast Corvette cars, which is really something NASA did. They gave the astronaut corps enough money to go buy the cars, or the auto dealers were willing to gift them because astronauts were cool. And we learn then too, these people are astronauts for a reason, because they are capable of handling these powerful machines at advanced speed and maneuvering. And we see that in their little race, which is fun, but we also, that there's a reason they do this job. And I thought that whole scenario made a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. That scene is wonderful. The other thing that I was like, these grown men are a bunch of kids. Like it to me it rang okay. To me it rang of seniors. It's the final day of school. The teacher let us out early. Let's go and party. I absolutely love that. And the other thing that I loved about it is as Ed and Gordo are leading everybody out of the room after meeting with Deke. And I believe it's either Ed or Gordo that says, I think it's Gordo, the one that says, the first, the last one to the outpost buys the drinks for everybody. And then they just run off, and then they get into their fast cars, and then they go to the outpost. So I think it's just a fun scene,
It is.
and those classic cars are just wonderful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, Ron D. Moore said that one of the hardest things about making the show from a production standpoint was getting the time period right, getting the closing, getting the cars right. And from this fan, I think they did a wonderful job with that. I really, really, really think so. I absolutely I think they did a wonderful job with that. Where I would like to move now is, as all these scenes are going on, we catch up with Leda and her father in Mexico. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Leda's mother was not doing well. And she has died now. And I really love the quick scene of Leda lighting a candle, looking at it really, really incredulously before lighting the candle and saying goodbye and going off to her father to basically cross the border illegally into America. But the reason why I like that scene so much is because looking back on it, when she was just holding the match, I was like, is she a little pyro? I was like, but as the show goes on, that's not it.
No,
That
that's
that,
not
that
it.
was a that was a really subtle way that Ron chose to indicate to the audience that this girl is going to do something special, but he
Mhm.
didn't tell us anything at all.
Nope.
He just showed us something, and I think that's the proper way to do storytelling. I just think it's really, really great. What did you think about Alita's story at this point when her and her father decide to join a bunch of people who are illegally going into the United States by way of a coyote?
Right. What I the only and I guess this is not a really a point to get hung up on. Um, the there's no clear other than the ethereal American dream, hope for something better.
Right.
They leave they leave Octavio's motivation to bring her into the U.S. Up to and maybe now that the mother is gone, there's just nothing left there, and he wants this. He sees something in this light that she's lit. Right, he sees this light in his daughter that isn't available where they are. They need that opportunity for her to learn or do or grow, that's available here that isn't there. So whatever that motivation is, drawing one of the things is that the transition to the flame on the can or on the match, it leads off from like a rocket launch, or there's something else that produces a flame that leads into that moment, and you're like, oh wait, that's a match. And she lights the candle for her mother, which is very appropriate for the representation, the faith they're showing. And it also kind of leads to fire is a symbol of rebirth. The phoenix dies in fire and is reborn to itself. And so this is kind of part of that. She's burning down this match, literally leaving that flame of her old life behind with her mother, and going off to this new life with her father. So again, this is the kind of storytelling that makes you weep for where some of the storytelling is these days. By contrast, and it isn't even that high-minded. You don't have to be, I wouldn't expect, too incredibly media literate to get this, the way they tell this story. I feel like it's just a very human way to tell a story, very natural.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like I said, guys, it really took me a long time to get comfortable with Aleda and her story, because I just didn't like her character in the first two seasons. I like the older version of her when she sort of gets her head out of her ass
Yeah, yeah.
and and and
She's her own
and
worst
lets
enemy for a long
yeah
time.
yeah yeah and lets Margot do with lets Margot sort of mentor her into becoming the person that she's going to become. But that's a story for another time.
Yep.
Anyway, just real quickly before I go on to the next scene, what do you think about the use of Richard Nixon and seeing all the supposed White House tapes of him, lamenting and being pissed that if he doesn't continue the space program, that the American public is going to hang him on, is going to hang him from a tree. Basically, he didn't say that, but I'm saying that.
Right.
So, what do you think about the way that they handled Richard Nixon and his, or this version of Richard Nixon's? What do you
Right.
think about this version of Richard Nixon's
The
desire to continue the space program because he doesn't want the public to hang another problem on his head?
Yeah, it's so this would be, of course, Nixon's first term, 69. He was elected for in 1968, and so he was serving in his first term, famously in our reality reelected to a second term, but then caught in the Watergate scandal. So our real world Watergate scandal, I believe all of this audio to be legitimate and edited from the tapes that Nixon actually made as part of because a lot of that, I think, while maybe not in the same order, I believe that to be actual audio from those tapes. I wouldn't be surprised because it's public archives. They don't have to pay to use it. And he literally said a lot of those kinds of things. So I thought it was, again, just clever. Take advantage. It puts us in that uncanny valley where, again, even when it comes to words that were said, they were said in both universes, but in different contexts, right? So that's just another interesting way to curve the line a little. The fact that they don't, with these folks, they don't try to shove an actor into the role. We have the historical footage. They take advantage of what's actually in our archives, rather than get somebody in there to do that, which is great. And there are some suspicions later, because this is an Apple TV Plus show, and they get into a couple seasons down the line, we get to Al Gore, and Al serves on Apple's board, so it's highly speculated that his audio is actual. He's actually recorded those lines later down in the series, but again, we'll get to that. But no, just it's the level of attention to detail, is so fantastic. And it is the team that builds this show. You mentioned Michael Okuda earlier, and Ron, both of them having worked on Star Trek for decades, and built the shows like Deep Space Nine that wove in these serial elements very cleverly. And to see that same attention to detail from those same creators brought to this, as they've gotten several decades to be really, really good at what they do.
I think I think I think it's actually wonderful, and I love the point that you brought up there, that most likely they actually used real recordings that Nixon probably said, because you said it's public record, and I like that because it's quite easy to attend. All they would have to do is chop it up and change a couple things here and there. They could definitely do that. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put together two outpost scenes back to back, just to be more a little bit efficiently. So
Perfect.
the first outpost scene is basically the astronauts drinking, having beer, and this is a really fun moment when they're all drunk, they're all having a good time, and they just want to hit somebody. And one of them takes the newspaper that we saw earlier with the red moon headline on it. He places it on a dartboard. And this is, like, I believe, for me, it's the proper introduction to one of my favorite characters on the show, Pam.
Yeah.
It's so cool because Pam basically owns the bar. And Ed just points to Pam, and Pam comes over. She's very hesitant, but she takes a bottle and she throws it at the dartboard with the fucking newspaper on it. I think that's such a cool way to introduce a character. I mean, we'll see more of her in this episode later, but it's such a cool way to introduce a character, because this woman is really cool, and I really hope that she's not just there for like window dressing. I hope that she has a bigger role, but like I said, in this pilot, which in the other scene that she's involved with, that I'm going to get to in just a second, I'm really glad that they did some really wonderful stuff with Pam, not only in this pilot episode, but as the series went on. So what did you just think about that really quick scene, just really, really quickly?
I love it. What my question is, I wonder if that is just a copy of the same paper that was at the outpost already, or if that is the copy Ed asked Karen to keep. And it doesn't matter. It just is a question I have, because it's not made clear. But to that, again, we get some darts, which it's never bad to play some darts. But we don't use darts. They use bottles of beer. And they get, I don't know if it's because they were more asking for permission to get rowdy, or if they really wanted Pam to be the one to go first. But they get her out there to throw the first beer bottle, and then that kicks off. And it is, again, it's another extension of you've got to let those feelings out somehow, and having a place to where it's safe to do so without repercussion, or without causing bodily harm to someone else.
Right.
You gotta, and I think too, us as viewers, we can feel their frustration, and we want to participate in that for sure.
Yeah, well, the next scene at the outpost that I want to cover is a scene later in the evening when Ed and Goro have had more than a couple,
Mm-hmm.
and a newspaper man. Seems so funny saying a newspaper man
Yeah.
now in our reality.
Right.
A newspaper man comes to the bar and he's looking for a story. He's looking for something that he can write to expose the space program.
Right.
This guy is looking to write a hit piece. And I really like how he goes to the bar and nobody gives him anything. But the one guy who gives him something is the one guy that can't afford to give him anything.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically goes up to Ed and says, "What do you think happened? Why do you think the Russians beat us to the moon first?" And Ed basically says, "We got scared because in our last attempt, we got scared. We were so close, but we didn't have the balls to land on the moon
Yep.
in that particular time and moment." And look, I understand that Ed has had a shitty day, that his job basically rammed him out. But at a point, even if you drink a lot, you have to know who you're speaking to. And for Ed not to know that this fucking moron was going to run with this shit, every time I watch the pilot, I go, "Oh man,
Come on, Ed.
Ron, really? I
Yeah.
really wish you would have given Ed some foresight." Because listen, like I said, Ed is basically this universe's Neil Armstrong, despite Neil Armstrong actually being in this pilot.
Right.
But I really wanted Ed to, although I understand being drunk is a thing, but like you have to know to not talk to reporters, especially in a moment like this.
Right.
Don't say anything.
Well, and he was kind of set up, so
Yes, by Gordo. Now that you mention that, do you want to talk about the way that Gordo just set him up there and sort of left him there?
He did. He did. So here's a little bit of background context for this moment, and this is something that mirrors real world history up to the point of the crew. Okay, so Apollo 10, of course, was a real mission. The lunar module was actually named Snoopy, and you'll hear them call it Snoopy from time to time. And it was the same mission to test the. So Apollo 10 was meant to test the undocking and entering low orbit for landing. Like Gordo says, we were 8 miles up. And so that on the actual moon landing is when they would begin the descent. And here the contention is, or the official story is, that they didn't load enough fuel onto the limb to allow for descent because that ship's traveling however fast it is, and it's using reactive control thrusters to slow itself and maneuver and actually end up being able to land. Now, that's the point of contention. The official story says, "Oh, we intentionally did not include enough fuel. It wasn't prepared to actually make a landing. They wouldn't have survived." And I believe that was not necessarily the official story. In reality, as part of obfuscation, it was more just that wasn't the mission, and so. That's just a point of one of those things where they're connecting into a real reality and an event that was true, but in theirs, they challenge Ed's. This reporter gets under his skin, which is easier to do when someone's inebriated. He gets under his skin by challenging his ability, his patriotism, his commitment to the mission. All of these things you do not do to Ed. And so that's how he gets him. That he gets him to out himself and call bullshit on the official story and says, "No, we had everything we needed. All of that is garbage. We could have landed and we could have come back." And so that's like you said, the reporter summarizes it. It actually does say, we used to have guts. We don't have guts anymore. And like you said, the reporter runs with it. I don't know if he ever declared himself a reporter, but Ed certainly didn't declare himself off the record. So,
yeah. This leads to Ed basically the next morning or in a couple of scenes getting reamed out by Deke Slayton. And the thing that I love about this scene for Ed is Ed basically says to Deke, "Come on, man. You know that everything I said in that interview got got twisted and got burnt around, and everything that I said was actually factual. I didn't fucking lie, and you know it. I didn't lie. Everything that I said in that interview or in that piece was things that we've actually said together. So why not have that out there, right? Why not have that out there from the front so they can't blame us?" And look, to Deke's credit, Deke at this point in his career or in this alternate reality is a politician. So Deke knows that it doesn't matter what the truth is. It matters to the point of how it's perceived to the public.
Exactly.
And at this point, NASA is holding on by a thread because Nixon is looking for any excuse or any failure to shut them down.
Yep.
Because
We haven't even
because
landed on the
right,
moon.
right, because he doesn't want to deal with this. So Ed basically gets lovely put. He gets suspended from the actual astronaut program, and he gets sent off to a little place called Siberia or calculations,
Yeah.
which is which is
Apollo program applications, which
thank
is
you.
what coordinates the things we were learning from the Apollo program into real world uses, which plays out in this show to a better degree than it did in our own reality. And we'll talk about that when it comes up in the episodes down the road. But yeah, gets dressed down. Can't believe it. Ed still thinks in the good old boy nature, the veteran, the camaraderie of the having been in the trenches together. And Deke's like, yeah, that's great. I can't play that game anymore because the president is literally on my ass. So, I love what we did together, but the president. So, and having Ed's worried about flying Apollo 15. Which was supposed to be his chance to land on the moon. But, we haven't even flown Apollo 11 yet, and the program's in question. So, and, Deke's correct. Ed was out of line, and it was being put in his place is more hey, it's how they snapping the leash, just giving him a little pullback to make sure he's reminded who's actually in charge. Because Von Braun, they mentions Von Braun wanted him out, so Deke saved his job to a degree, at least.
Mhm. Yeah. So you mentioned we haven't even done Apollo 11 yet. We haven't even landed on the moon. So the next scene that I want to talk about is a quick scene when two astronauts who are in a simulator and something goes wrong with the computer. And uh, Gene Kranz, who we have not mentioned, but he's coming up because I love Gene. I absolutely love that guy. Um, Gene Kranz asked one of the NASA engineers to figure out what's wrong with the system and where the alarm is coming from. And just outside the big NASA main room is a smaller room. And Margot's sitting there, and she sees she has a readout of the actual problem, and she's sitting there. She acts like a small 6-year-old in kindergarten who has the answer to the question, but is too afraid to raise her hand. And I love the way that the director goes from the main NASA room where everybody is to where Margot is, and to where Warner Blanc can see that Margot has the answer, but he doesn't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets to such a point where Gene Kranz is like screaming at the guy for the answer. And Margot jumps in and has a quick dialogue and actually tells the astronauts that it's not a problem. It's just the computer not being able to assess the information quick enough. But it's not a problem. It's just the computer has too much information, and that's why everything is going haywire. What do you think about Margot's hesitance to jump in at that moment and give the right answer, because she must have known that they needed it? And also, I really love, just real quickly, a really quick scene or several scenes in this episode having to do with Von Braun and Margot and their dynamic, and
Mm-hmm.
also the way that Von Braun sort of mentors Margot and says, listen, if you want to be flight director one day, you have to give people exactly what they need when they need it, no less. If you don't do that, you're always going to be where you are right now. I'm paraphrasing here, but what do you think about that scene in the test and everything that happened with there? And what do you think with all the scenes in this episode with Margot and Bon, with Bon telling Margot that she has to get a spine. If she doesn't get a spine, she's not going to go. She's not going to go up within the NASA program.
Right. Again, a masterpiece in visual storytelling. We aren't aware. We're not in the loop that it's a simulation until they pan out. The camera pulls out of the limb window and then pans around to what's a projection screen. So we're brought into the fact that it's simulation, but not until stuff starts going wrong. And the reason that this is key is because what is happening in the simulation, that 1202 alarm, was what actually happened on our trip to the moon. As Armstrong's trying to land, the computer goes into that same 1202 alarm, and it's the exact same thing. The computer is receiving too much data and constantly rebooting himself. Now, just as an aside, now I won't go down this rabbit hole, but the Apollo guidance computer, and you'll hear him refer to it as the AGC several times. The Apollo guidance computer is a marvel of engineering. Just kind of one key interesting point, the way the code had to be written and stored to run that computer, it's literally woven into the insulation blanket through copper wiring. It is insane. And to I'll put out some information when we wrap things up about where you can learn more, but the dynamic between Von Braun and Margot is very well established in this. We got the glance to kind of key us into the fact they have something more than just this working attachment, and so we learned that he knows her father and she is estranged from her father, lightly estranged, I guess would be the way to put it. And the fact that he tells her, look, because she has the answer, the guy on the floor, Fido, can't give him the answer because he's not cool in the moment. He's frustrated. That's something that they're conveying, that Margot had already done the homework. She read the code for the Apollo guidance computer. She mapped all of the errors. She knew exactly what it meant, what the consequences would be, and how to solve it. And the person whose job it was, just because he was a man, was listened to, and he couldn't produce the result. And she told them, it's fine. This is what it is. And he's like, you stay in your lane and sit down and be quiet. And it was literally her job to be his backup, right? Like that off room you mentioned is like those are the backup controllers, or the second set of eyes kind of thing. And yeah, Von Braun is like, listen, when you know you're right, you have to say you're right, or you're never going to get to do this job.
Right. So now NASA has got their ducks in a row. Ed has been grounded, and Apollo 11 is going to the moon, and they're going to land no matter what, because if they don't land, everybody is fucked and everybody's out of job, and that's the end of the space program for everybody. So it is either moon or bust at this point, and this is the moment of the episode for me, and I'm pretty sure it's yours as well. But this is where we actually get a wonderful speech from an actual flight director of NASA, a legend, Gene Kranz, and the speech that Ron D. Moore gives the actor who's playing Gene Kranz, who's a brilliant character actor. I can never remember his name. It's so wonderful. I'm sorry?
His name is Eric Ladden.
Eric Ladden.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a great character actor, but I can never remember his name. But the speech that he gives as Gene Kranz is wonderful. But I love it because before he starts, he tells a underling in NASA to close all the doors and turn off all the cameras.
Yep.
I love his speech that he gives because in essence, it's a speech. It's a promise. In a way, it's Ron D. Moore and the other creators promising the audience that if the show goes well, here's where we could go.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and in hindsight, we're about to be 6 years into the show now, but we've gone to those places,
We have
and
indeed.
and we continue to go. But I'm very curious, what were you feeling when you saw Gene Kranz delivering that all-inspiring speech, and what were some of your thoughts on it?
Okay, so as you mentioned, you and I we have a lot of hero worship for this guy
Yeah,
because
we
of,
love Gene.
I mean, his biography is absolutely incredible. The things the man did, and I believe last time we spoke about, it, we learned he's still with us, which is fantastic.
Yes, we did.
But famously, every vest he ever wore was made for him by his wife, and he wore a different one for every mission. And this speech harkens to, because I don't know if we know this in the episode yet, but our attempt to land on the moon, while ultimately successful, brings up a bit of drama. And so it's kind of has that same intensity in oh my gosh, can we or can't we talk to these folks? That in our reality was Apollo 13, right? So he gives a very similar speech in that essence, and uses the famous line, failure is not an option, which is the name of his autobiography. Go read it. And is uniquely tied to the Apollo 13, what do they call it? Our most successful failure. Because, famously the mission was scrubbed in flight because of this malfunction, but we were able to return the astronauts home safely. But very similar speech given here, given the circumstance. And there are people in points in history who were built for a job, and Gene was built for that job. No arguments, full stop, no debate. No one else could have
Yeah.
done that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, what Gene did, what the actual Gene
Exactly.
did for the space program. I mean, he fucking wrote the procedure book
He built
on
mission
on
control.
on everything that a mission control commander or anybody sitting in that chair should do. He wrote the fucking book.
Yep, literally. So yeah,
So
anytime we get a chance to see Gene portrayed, especially in an
anywhere.
accurate,
Yeah.
he's been played. Ed Harris did a fantastic job in Apollo
Fantastic job
13.
with
So
it.
yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, no. The first time that I came upon Gene Kranz was in Apollo 13.
Hmm.
And the way that Harris played him sort of gave me the idea of who the guy was.
Yep. Yep.
Basically. So okay, so we're at the moment when the astronauts are going to land on the moon, and I absolutely love the tension that Ron gave this momentous moment as the
Hmm.
episode is slowly coming to a close here. And I love the fact, of course, this didn't happen. Yeah, I love the fact that at a point when they're about to land, they're running out of fuel, and the
Hmm.
guy who the guy who is the government attache for NASA says that, should we abort? And I love what Gene does. He sort of looks over to him and he goes, "Are you fucking kidding me?" He doesn't say that, but he says, "It is this astronaut's ship now. What
Hmm.
he says goes."
Yep.
And I'm
And
like, that is such a baller move because
yep.
because because he knows that they have gone past the point of return. They have to do this. If they don't do this, they're all screwed.
Yep. Well, he knows, and that's why, even in our reality, that's those again, there are people who are built for the job, and we learn that when they do the job.
Right.
Michael Collins, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong were built for that job, and they had all resolved in real life. That if it goes poorly, it goes poorly for all of us. And if Neil and Buzz had been stranded on the moon surface, Michael wasn't coming home, and that's just fact. And they play on that here with the tension that they build. While in our actual moon landing, and this is a great time to point this out. There's a BBC podcast out there that if our viewers and listeners want to look it up, it's called 13 Minutes to the Moon, which is how long it takes to descend from the command module in the lunar module to the lunar surface. And it is I think even a 13 episode podcast that discusses in a documentary style the moon landing, and it is so good. But anyway, again, a lot of real world mimicry here in the amount of fuel and about to go bingo down, and it's not where they meant to land, and the terrain was a little rough, but a different outcome than what we got for ourselves.
Yeah, I absolutely love the way that this episode was shot of the moment when they're just about to land, but all the switches go haywire and everything turns off. And I love the moment where Gene stands up and he does a very, very Gene thing. He says, "Nobody panic. Everybody, it's almost like Ronald D. Moore wanted to give him that moment that Ron Howard gave Ed Harris in Apollo 13. He's like, "Calm down, people. Let's work the problem." He didn't say that, but he gave him a moment like that, and I really, really, really appreciated that. When you saw that moment, what were you thinking about? Like, oh shit, I think is Ron going to have them die? Because if you had them die, like where would they go? So what were you
Exactly.
thinking about that moment?
On first watch when it was new, and I hadn't seen the story yet, knowing the kind of storyteller Ron is, the fact that he isn't afraid to swing big and hit hard, it wasn't clear. I was in initial watch on the same edge of my seat as Mission Control, and again, he understands the narrative. He understands his target audience. And this is, again, target audience. This is a show that I think took a couple seasons for the larger zeitgeist to get the message. And it's popular now, but when you and I came on board, we were the early adopters. Folks weren't talking about it like they have been since. And it's just this kind of storytelling that he's good at that draws us in. With that, but giving an actor to deliver a true to character moment, and I mean true to the character of the real world person, to give them the chance to deliver that moment, show again their strength in running Mission Control, and two, essentially just snapping in the air to remind everyone in the room that you are a professional, you're here for a reason, and we can work this problem. We don't have enough data to solve anything yet, so there's nothing to panic about. And by working the problem, they just continue to try to keep in communication. They try to relay through the command module. They get Michael to place a scope on the landing point and see that the craft is down. Very, very good moment overall.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Ron finally breaks his tension by having a destroyer transmission from the lunar lander come through, and basically they're down and they're okay. And I love the moment of release, and I love the fact that the director of this episode showed all our main characters and all our main players. Ron gave them a well-deserved moment of elation. And
And us too.
yeah, he did. He really
Viewers.
did. He really did. I love the moment when we go to the outpost for a quick second and we just see Ed there celebrating with everybody. But Ed does something very, very interesting. He slams his hand on the bar as to
Mhm.
say, "Okay, I'm not fired and I can still fly."
Yep.
So
Yep.
I really like that, considering what we know about Ed now, and
Mhm.
we understand that Ed is really the John Wayne kind of character. He's like, he would rather go down in a blaze of glory than go down as a wimp.
Yep.
So I did find that really interesting. One quick thing before we wrap up this first review for All Mankind. What do you think about the way that Ron handled the astronaut wives in this episode?
It's another kind of this. If there was a weak point in the narrative overall, it's this moment as they gather around. And one thing and it makes sense, I think, in historical context, the nature of the 60s, but the fact that the astronauts who aren't on mission aren't celebrating with their wives. The wives are gathered at Tracy's house, I believe, at Gordo's house, and then the guys are out at the bar. But this is where we were introduced to it's Deke's wife.
Deke's wife,
her
yeah.
name is Marge, Marge Slayton, who comes in, and she's obviously a woman who understands her husband's position and knows what it's like to have been an astronaut wife and be a part of the program. She is obviously in a liaison role when it comes to communication and how handle PR with this stuff. And she has a message for Karen too about how Ed might progress his career again, which is an interesting point. But in the moment of tension, she lets all of that go and directs traffic. Essentially, she knows what's going to need to happen because she's worked a disaster before. Because Apollo 1 still occurred in this universe, so we still lost those 3 astronauts on the pad. So she's been a part of that. She knows crisis management. But again, yeah, they kind of got the short stick because, as you and I have seen in other, historical dramas that we've watched regarding the space program, the way the wives were treated by the media and overall was very diminutive and coddling, but also incredibly disruptive. So Marge being on task, kind of letting bygones be bygones and making sure that the wives of the affected astronauts had the support they would need in this uncertainty. Really well done, but again, not enough of it.
I really like the way that Marge sort of takes charge of all the astronaut women, and she sort of tells everybody it's going to be a long night, and she goes, okay, you guys stay here, you guys stay here, you guys stay here, and you guys just stay here at the home base if something happens. But I love the way that she says it's going to be a long night. And I also love the way that she tries to tell Karen that, being a man of honor and loving your country and being a patriot can only get you so far when it comes to what Ed did and said to the reporter. But I really like that Karen doesn't flip out in that moment, that she just sort of takes it and she just sort of takes it and sort of rolls with it. Also, real quickly, I do want to point out one quick scene that I forgot to slot in there. I love the moment when Karen flips out at Ed for
About where they're going to
what
go.
he said to the reporter. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a good scene, and I think it's really rings true to what astronaut wives could have been feeling at the moment, because astronaut wives were sort of the companion pieces to their men, right? They didn't have much agency because of the time period. And I love the fact that Karen is not afraid of Ed, and she will give him a piece of her mind no matter what he's going to say.
Right.
And I just think it's a really wonderful moment. Do you have any quick thoughts on that?
Well, to kind of close the loop on that, she gives him the business and he ends up on the couch.
Yeah, it's just really
But
great.
the couch is too short, and it gets a crick in his neck. So he goes into he comes tail tucked into the bedroom, and she pulls the covers aside and come on in. And she's like, "Is it your neck?" And he's like, "Yeah, that couch is too short." And she goes, "I think it's just right." And he goes, "Why?" And she's like, "Because it leads to this," that she still loves him. She's letting him know that, yeah, no, you're a damned idiot, but I'm only willing to go so far to let you get a crick in your neck, and I'll let you off the hook. But something that I want to draw back about Karen as a character that we learn is how competent, my dog, how competently she's conveyed as what would be, and we see this later, but we already see as far as like the family manager, right? She's the executive of this family. She had I don't know, a half a dozen different ways Ed's career could go if he wasn't an astronaut. Oh, you go back to the Navy, and if you do this, you'll be there, and if you do that, you'll be here, and you'll be flying this, and you can be. She had contingency plans that Ed hadn't even thought of, because that's her job as the family manager. And again, we see that she knows how to play her. She knows how to play her part. And she understands that it's not the part she should be allowed to play, but she does her job for the better of Ed's career, because she knows that's important to him, and she loves him. But yeah, her resolve in not being upset, with what Marge tells her, because she's there defending Ed, and he said he's a man, and he learned at Annapolis that it's duty, honor, and country, and so on. And she's, Marge reminds her that, it comes down at a certain point, you can only have two. You got to pick two of those three. And, what's Ed going to do? Karen, much stronger as we learn going forward.
Yeah, I really feel what Ron and the other writers put Karen through in this season really shapes where she goes as a character going forward. And no spoilers if you haven't seen the show, but what she goes through is terrific, guys. It's not funny at all.
Not good.
No, it's not good at all. So this episode basically ends with Gene Kranz and Deke in mission control. And I love the line that it ends on. Deke basically says, "We did it." And Gene basically says, "Now we got to get him home."
Yeah.
And it ends right there.
Yep.
I think it's just a great way to end off a very, very, very long pilot, a movie length pilot, because this was an hour and 4 minutes.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So yeah, it was just a great way to end this pilot. Any final thoughts that you may have?
Yeah, and this just came to me as you mentioned, the closing line there being, "Now we got to get them home," and it resonated in the moment. But thinking too, that is a soft cliffhanger, right? Because we're still, or at least my mindset's operating under the our history. Oh yeah, they get home just fine, right? But in our setting here, the lander's akimbo, right? It's about at a 45-degree angle off its landing skid. And so, it's got to, when it launches, it's going to launch, and then they'll have to correct. So it's still not clear. Our guys getting off the lunar surface. And that's a great way to kind of tack on that cliffhanger. And this series was originally released week to week, and when the new season comes, it'll be week to week again. So it does actually leave you tense. You can't just, unless you're binging after the fact, you can't just go and see what happens next. And there was one other thing that I wanted to draw kind of as one of our closing points. And I can't remember at which scene it is. But Von Braun addresses Margot, and he tells her, "Your mouth is going to get you into big trouble someday."
You have no idea how ready it is.
Exactly. And I was like, oh, that's where I was like, if they didn't know where they were going from that point, they really went back and drew off some things. But I gotta believe that those kinds of things are either just happy little accidents, or that is just another lace in the thread there of how well this was mapped from the beginning. Because yeah, Margot's mouth will get her in trouble someday.
Yes, it definitely will. But Dan, as we say goodbye now, is there anything that you would like to promote to people who may be watching this, or anywhere that the good people who may be watching this can find you online?
Oh, absolutely. So I just recently created a link tree to kind of make this a lot easier. So if you visit Linktree, so it's link. It's really, really kind of messed up. So it's Linktree, but the dot is between the R and the double E. So Linktree /Decker Media, DECKR Media. And you can see all of my links there. But I'm on YouTube. I'm on two role play shows. One called Expedition of the Damned, where we play Warhammer Fantasy 4th Edition, and the other is the Emberfell Whispers from the Stars, which is a custom or a homebrew world of D&D 5e. Hours of entertainment out there, and you can hear me make silly accents. But that's all linked from my Linktree.
Awesome, guys. And if you want to catch up with me and all my adventures online, the best place to do that is on X, formerly known as Twitter. If you go there, you'll see a link to my link tree that will lead you down the rabbit hole of all the wonderful stuff that I do. Just before we go, if you guys have seen this episode, tell us what you liked about it or tell us what you didn't like about it in the comment section below. But I'd like to thank my friend Dan Decker for joining me for this
Absolutely.
episode, and I look forward to talking to you about For All Mankind as we go through the seasons here. It's going to be so much fun.
Absolutely, I am so excited, and as Alan Shepard famously once said, "Let's light this candle."
All right, guys. So on that wonderful note, until next time, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
So much happened here, and so much is about to.